Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're digging into a topic that, well, it affects a huge number of people.
Yeah.
The modern reality, the burdens, really, of renting here in America.
That's right. And we're doing this based on a specific stack of sources you, our listener, sent over. These excerpts focus squarely on the challenges renters are facing right now.
Yeah, and reading through them, it's pretty striking. Our goal here is to unpack the key insights from this material, highlight what makes renting feel so difficult for so many folks today.
Exactly. And honestly, the picture painted by these sources is quite frustrating. It suggests renting has changed, maybe significantly compared to how things used to be.
It definitely feels that way from this material. It goes way beyond just finding a place you like and paying rent each month. There are layers here.
Layers of difficulty, yeah.
Yeah.
The sources suggest a power dynamic that feels, well, heavily tilted. Lots of stress, lots of financial strain described.
Okay, so let's get into it. Let's unpack the stack and see what really stands out.
Yeah.
One of the first things, maybe the biggest, is just getting your foot in the door.
Yeah.
The hurdle before you even get approved.
Right. That's a huge focus in the material. The fear, cost, and difficulty. First off, the credit score requirement.
Ah, yes, the credit score. What do the sources say about that?
They mention needing a good score, specifically pointing to something above 600 points.
Okay, 600. And if you're below that, what happens then?
Well, according to the source, you could be looking at needing a lot of cash up front, like 3 to 5 months rent just to get the keys.
3 to 5 months. Wow, that's a massive amount for most people to pull together.
It really is. And a low score isn't the only thing that can stop you right away.
What else?
The source mentions immediate denial is possible if you have a recent felony or if a previous landlord reported you for not paying rent or owing money.
Okay, that makes some sense. But is there a catch?
Well, the source claims something pretty significant here. It says if there's any claim on your credit report from a previous landlord, the new landlord might demand you pay that debt before they approve you.
Wait, even if you dispute the debt, even if it's wrong.
Regardless of whether it's valid or not, according to this source, you apparently have to clear it first to move forward.
Wow, that really puts you in a bind. Pay something you might not even owe just to get housing? That feels like a huge amount of leverage.
It certainly sounds like it. And beyond those hurdles, there are the fees, just the fees to apply.
Right. What kind of fees are we talking about here?
They add up quickly based on these sources. First, the mandatory security deposit, usually noted around $400, $500, could be higher if your credit's bad.
Okay, security deposit. What else?
Then the application stuff. A credit check fee, maybe around $200. A background check, potentially another $200. And then a general application fee, maybe $100, $200.
So you could easily be looking at hundreds, maybe $500, $600, or even more just to submit an application.
That's what the numbers in the source suggest, yeah.
And what happens to that money if you don't get the apartment?
This is crucial. The sources are explicit. Application fees, background check fees, credit report fees, even security deposits paid with the application. They are non-refundable.
Non-refundable. So you shell out all this cash, and if you're denied, maybe the place got rented, maybe they just didn't like something, income wasn't high enough, that money's just gone.
That's exactly what the source states. It basically shifts all the financial risk of the application process onto the person applying.
That feels fundamentally different. And what if you just can't afford all these upfront costs or meet the requirements?
The source mentions needing a cosigner in that case. But it frames it as, not just getting someone to vouch for you, but another way the overall cost or difficulty increases because now someone else has to take on that financial risk too.
Okay, so just getting approved is a major financial and administrative challenge, it sounds like. But the sources suggest the burdens don't magically disappear once you're finally in.
Not at all. It's far from over. Beyond just the rent itself, which the source says is, quote, going through the roof every year.
Yeah, we hear about rising rents constantly.
It's the additional mandatory fees that really seem to pile up, according to these sources, turning predictable costs into something much harder to manage.
So it's not just the base rent increasing.
Right. The material details these extra charges, like getting charged more just for having a pet.
Okay, pet fees. Pretty common, unfortunately.
And also the source notes, your rent might actually go up if a partner, say a girlfriend or boyfriend, moves in with you.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Adding a person means a rent hike. That seems invasive. Linking rent to your personal living situation like that?
That's the scenario described. And then there's parking.
What about parking?
Not optional according to the source. Mandatory payment for parking.
Yeah.
And if you don't pay, your car gets towed. Simple as that.
So another required monthly cost, non-negotiable.
Exactly. And beyond these ongoing money issues, another theme that really jumps out, and it's quite concerning, is this feeling of, well, an erosion of privacy once you're living there.
Erosion of privacy. How so?
This was a really strong point in the material. The source describes landlords or management coming into apartments incredibly often, like almost daily inspections in some cases mentioned.
Daily. That can't be right.
That's the extreme mentioned, but definitely frequent. The source talks about inspections 4, 6, sometimes 7 or more times a month.
7 times a month. That number just sounds unreal. What possible reasons could they have for entering that often?
Well, the source lists a whole bunch of pretexts. Fire safety checks, carbon monoxide detector checks, smoke detectors, bed bug inspections, looking for leaks, even if there isn't one reported.
Okay.
General maintenance checks, wellness checks, they call them, mold inspections, pest control spraying. It's a long list.
So a constant parade of reasons to be inside your home.
Exactly. And the source even mentions they might cut the water to the whole building during some of these visits. So it's not just the entry, it's the disruption.
Yeah, it's the frequency, the disruption, the feeling that your personal space isn't really yours.
That's the cumulative effect described. The source says the tenant basically has no privacy, feels constantly bothered, and it gets worse.
How so?
The source uses very direct language saying unannounced entries happen, specifically mentions this happening in the South, sometimes with staff walking in on tenants when they're, well, undressed.
Oh, wow. That's a serious violation. That specific detail really hits home, the feeling of invasion.
It does, and the source uses some strong words to describe the mindset behind this.
What kind of words?
It conveys this belief that landlords feel like, quote, masters and gods, thinking state laws back them up and doing whatever they want. The source finds this whole attitude really problematic.
This idea of absolute authority. And it sounds like this perceived power imbalance extends to things like leases and evictions, too.
Definitely. This is where the sources describe what feels like a pretty stark double standard.
Okay, how does that play out?
The material mentions new policies, and the source questions if they're even backed by state law, sometimes requiring tenants to give really long notice if they want to leave. Like 2 months' notice.
2 months' notice from the tenant just to move out.
That's the claim in the source.
Yeah.
And then it contrasts that sharply with how landlords handle evictions.
How so?
Claiming landlords often give no notice at all when they want someone out, sometimes just kicking tenants out or calling the police immediately for an eviction.
So the tenant needs to give long notice, but the landlord might give none. That seems incredibly unbalanced.
That's precisely the dynamic described, and it leads the source to use some really provocative language to express their frustration. They say it feels like, quote, slavery is back under a different name, which is renters.
Wow. That's a powerful comparison. It really underlines the feeling of being trapped and controlled that the source is trying to convey.
It certainly does. And this inflexibility, it's not just about leaving. It apparently affects things like late rent payments, too.
Late fees. What about those?
The source says tenants get hit with penalties, maybe $50 to $100, even if they're just 1 day late, or even less than a day.
1 day late. What if there's a genuine reason, like your paycheck schedule doesn't line up perfectly with the first of the month?
Well, the source gives that exact example. A government employee paid every 15 days. Their pay might not hit right on the first. But the source claims even if they show proof of their pay schedule, the landlords don't care. They still get penalized. Every time.
It sounds like a system built for collecting penalties, not for understanding real-life situations. Rigidity seems key.
That's the impression given. And the source details other specific, challenging situations renters face.
Like what? Give us an example.
Okay, one involves military personnel. The source claims that even if they get last-minute deployment orders, official government orders, and show proof, they might still be charged for the rest of their lease.
Charged for breaking a lease because they were deployed? That seems incredibly unfair, especially given the circumstances.
It does feel that way reading the description, and there are issues described when moving out, too.
What happens then?
The source talks about landlords charging tenants if they accidentally leave anything behind furniture, small items. They call it a storage cost.
A storage cost for forgotten items.
Yeah, and if the tenant refuses to pay it, the landlord might report it as owed rent on their credit report. The source's assessment is blunt: you have no say.
So another potential cost and a hit to your credit even after you've moved out. And speaking of moving, the source wasn't too kind about moving companies either.
No, it calls them vultures. points out they charge not just per mile, but also per hour. So costs can skyrocket unexpectedly.
How so?
Like if there are delays, maybe you're waiting for the keys from the landlord, something not your fault, you get charged extra for that waiting time. The source claims flat quotes of maybe $200, $300 can easily become $500, $700 by the end.
So the actual act of moving adds another layer of unpredictable, potentially high cost. What about just getting basic repairs done in the apartment?
That's another area of difficulty described in the sources. They claim landlords sometimes refuse to do proper repairs, especially, they note, if a tenant is trying to renew their lease.
Really? They won't fix things if you're staying.
That's the scenario described. And the source mentions a lack of recourse. Complaining about unrepaired issues, even going to government agencies, doesn't seem to get things fixed, according to this account.
Just stuck with the problem. Are there extra costs tied to repairs too?
Sometimes, yes, according to the source. They mention landlords trying to charge after-hours fees if a repair visit happens outside 9 to 5, like after 5 p.m. or before 8 a.m.
An extra fee for inconvenient timing.
Seems like it. It also mentions overcharging if you forget your keys, doubling the fee at night or on weekends.
Little things, maybe, but they add up to that feeling the source describes of being nickel and dimed or landlords looking for extra charges. Let's jump back to the application process for a second. The source mentioned more privacy concerns there.
Yeah, this was another thing the source found, quote, ridiculous. They talk about being asked for really extensive personal information.
Like what?
Names, addresses, phone numbers for relatives, sometimes needing 3 to 5 different family contacts.
Contact info for your relatives? Why on earth would they need that?
Good question. The source also says they ask for a super long rental history, like 15 years back, including names and phone numbers of all their previous landlords.
15 years of rental history. That's intense.
Yeah. And the source feels like the landlord asks for all this as if they're doing you a favor by even considering you, even though you're the one paying them rent.
Does the landlord give a reason for needing all this incredibly detailed personal info?
The source says they cite safety, but the source just dismisses that as nonsense. They argue, official address changes and ID checks happen through the DMV or other government agencies. This deep dive into your family and past landlords feels like something else.
It definitely sounds like building a very detailed personal profile, going way beyond just checking finances or criminal history.
I see.
Okay, let's talk security deposits again. We know they might be non-refundable with the application, but what about getting it back when you move out?
Ah, yes. The source claims landlords often just don't refund them.
Don't refund them, even if you leave the place in good shape.
They state landlords will claim damages were caused, even if they weren't, and just keep the deposit to cover supposed repairs.
So they might just invent damages to keep your money. That's a common fear. But the source presents it as pretty standard practice.
That's the experience laid out in this material, yeah. And on top of rent and deposit issues, the source points out tenants routinely pay separately for utilities. Trash, water, electricity, all extra.
Okay, separate utilities. That's becoming more common. Anything else?
Some landlords apparently even charge extra for using common area things like the laundry room washing machines and dryers.
Pay-per-use laundry in your own building.
Seems so. And mandatory renters' insurance payments are mentioned too, another required cost.
Right. Renters insurance, we hear that a lot.
And the source notes the irony here, saying some of these things, like water and trash, were supposedly covered by an initial maintenance fee paid way back during the application.
Ah, so you pay a fee up front for maintenance, then pay separately for water and trash anyway, and then might not get your security deposit back because of claimed damages needing repairs. It really does sound like a cascade of fees and KIP funds.
That's a picture painted, yes.
Yeah.
The source also brings up income requirements and tactics that sound a bit like bait and switch.
Bait and switch, how?
Well, one thing is landlords denying people because they don't meet an income threshold where the landlord decides if you can afford it, even if you think you can manage the rent.
Okay, income rules. What's the bait and switch part?
That comes in when they show you one apartment initially, maybe get you interested, get you to apply. But then after you're approved, they only offer you a different apartment.
A different one than you saw and applied for. What happens if you don't want the different one?
According to the source, you get 2 choices. Wait maybe a month or more for another unit to maybe become available, remembering you've already paid fees, or just be denied.
And if you choose denial, or the wait is too long.
The landlord keeps all those non-refundable fees, application, maintenance, background check, credit check, all gone.
So they can show you apartment A, offer you apartment B, and if you say no thanks, they still keep the hundreds of dollars you paid up front. That really highlights the power of those non-refundable fees, doesn't it?
It certainly seems to, based on this account. Shifting gears a bit, the force also talks about control over the actual living environment, specifically HVAC, temperature control.
Wait, controlling the temperature, that sounds really unusual.
It does, but it's described here. The source mentions tenants being required to keep the AC running constantly, supposedly to prevent damage to the system, which could lead to charges.
Required to run the AC.
Okay.
Strange, but maybe understandable if they're worried about damage.
Yeah.
You said control.
Yeah, even more striking, the source claims landlords can directly control the apartment's temperature, like overriding whatever the tenant sets on their thermostat.
The landlord sets the temperature for your apartment. You can't adjust it.
That's what's described. Examples given are setting it to, say, 75 degrees in the summer, 70 in the winter, fixed temperatures. And the tenant can't change it even if they're freezing or sweating, maybe have a baby in the house.
That is an incredible level of control over someone's basic comfort in their own home.
And the source even claims tenants are forbidden from using their own space heaters to supplement.
Wow. Okay. What about the physical condition? Basic structural things, repairs.
Issues there, too, according to the source. Landlords not fixing obvious stuff like doors with big gaps letting bugs in.
Simple things like sealing a door.
Apparently not. Or refusing to replace old window frames for just one tenant, saying they'll only do it when they do the whole building, essentially ignoring individual problems. Same for window screens, not replacing them even if damaged, again, letting bugs in.
So small problems that add up, making the place less comfortable, but the landlord isn't addressing them individually.
That's the situation described. And going back to landlords entering the apartment, the source describes something that sounds like more than just inspection.
What do you mean?
Well, using pretexts to enter when the tenant isn't home. Carpet cleaning is the specific example mentioned, occurring in Minnesota.
Okay, entering for carpet cleaning while you're at work.
But then the source makes a pretty serious claim. Coming home to find items opened, things turned upside down, suggesting their belongings were actually searched during that visit.
That's a really disturbing accusation. Searching belongings under the guise of maintenance, and this lack of control seems to extend even to basic security.
Right. The source notes tenants often aren't allowed to change their own door locks.
Can't change your locks. Why not?
The reason given is that the landlord needs access at all times for inspections or maintenance.
So you can't even ensure you're the only one with a key to your own home.
Wow.
The source also had points about gated communities specifically.
Yeah, gated communities add another layer of complexity, according to this material. More rules, more potential fees,
How so?
like not paying parking fees or maybe HOA fees, even if your main deal is with the landlord. Not the HOA could be grounds to block your car from entering the community or even get it towed.
So you could be locked out of where you live because of a dispute with a separate entity, the HOA.
Seems like it. The source says you often have to apply separately to the HOA just for gate access. And if you mess up like using temporary paper passes too much, you risk penalties or towing.
More fees then to get your car back.
Exactly. And the source suggests the only real fix is often paying more fees, maybe directly to the HOA, for a permanent RFID pass, plus paying towing and impound fees.
Just adds another layer of cost and hassle for vehicle access. What about mandatory auto pay? Was that mentioned?
It was. The source states some landlords now refuse to rent unless you set up automatic payments, linking your debit card for rent collection, usually on the first of the month.
And that ties back to the pay schedule problem we talked about earlier.
It does. Creates issues if your payday isn't right before the first. And the source notes it's also a problem if you get paid by physical check, calling it a big headache because a landlord wants everything electronic.
Again, optimizing for the landlord's system, maybe not the tenant's reality. The source also brought up technology, AI, and something called application scams.
Yeah, mentions AI being used in the application process now. Claims it's used to decide qualification, assess risk, maybe flag someone as high risk based on things like credit score, or even just having too many recent credit inquiries.
So AI is becoming a gatekeeper for housing now, based on potentially narrow criteria.
That's the role described here. And connected to the application process, the source describes these alleged application scams.
Application scams. What exactly does the source mean by that?
The claim is that some property management companies knowingly accept applications and collect all those non-refundable fees we discussed, application, security deposit upfront, background, credit check fees,
Yeah.
before they even finish the checks, even when they already know they probably won't rent to that person, or maybe don't even have an apartment available.
They take your money knowing you likely won't get the place.
That's the accusation. The source describes being told it's impossible to rent to you only after they've already collected all that non-refundable cash.
Wow.
There's an example mentioned from Texas where upfront fees have to be paid via money order, but the first month's rent has to be auto pay online. The source found that structure very strange.
Yeah, it does sound like the payment methods are set up to make sure they get that initial non-refundable chunk, no matter what the final outcome is.
And the source's conclusion on this is pretty stark. It ensures the landlord keeps the money, even if they deny someone for reasons they knew about from the start, essentially profiting from rejecting people.
Okay, when you put all these pieces together, the high barrier to entry, the constant extra fees, the lack of privacy, the lack of control, the unfair policies, the repair issues, these potential scams, it paints a really overwhelming picture for renters described in these sources.
It absolutely does, and the sources connect all these dots to a larger societal impact.
What's the final conclusion drawn in the material?
The source explicitly states that these accumulated problems, the sheer difficulty and expense, all these financial burdens and hurdles, are directly contributing to the rise in homelessness. People just can't afford to navigate the system to get housing.
That's a very direct and powerful claim, linking these specific rental practices to homelessness.
It is, and the source attributes these issues largely to, quote, greed or the property management industry, essentially blaming the system itself.
And what's the overall feeling conveyed at the end of the source material?
It expresses a deep sense of disappointment, a feeling of not recognizing, quote, the land of the free and the brave anymore, seeing it instead as a place where, in their view, certain powerful entities can just do what they want without facing consequences.
Well, we've certainly covered a lot of ground here digging into this stack of sources you, the listener, provided. It really details a wide and, frankly, quite frustrating range of burdens renters might face today.
Yeah, from the sheer cost and difficulty of just applying, through that pervasive lack of privacy and control while living there, to all the financial practices, surprise costs, and the feeling of having little recourse that runs through these accounts.
These details definitely paint a picture of a rental landscape that's incredibly challenging right now, based on these sources. It's
Yeah.
clearly about much more than just the monthly rent check.
Absolutely. It's the whole experience, the potential pitfalls, the power dynamics described in this material.
And maybe, as you've been listening, some of this resonates with your own experiences, or perhaps it sheds light on the struggles of people you know trying to find or keep rental housing. Just remember, our goal here was to understand the points raised in this specific stack of sources you shared.
Right. Examining this material gives us a clear window into one perspective on the current rental market and its very real challenges.
So let's leave you with a final thought to mull over, something sparked by the material we've discussed today. Given all these hurdles, the lack of control, the significant costs, and that perceived power imbalance described in these sources, what does the future really hold for renting in America? And what does this perspective suggest about where the balance of power between landlords and tenants is heading?
That's the big question raised by this material, isn't it?
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We hope exploring these sources gave you a clearer picture of the complex challenges renters might be facing today.
Until next time.